All right, today on Musician's Edition, we are going to look at number 98 from the Essential Elements Snare Drum book. And we're going to work on a particularly difficult dynamic on all percussion instruments, but especially on the snare drum, which is piano, right, or quiet. So as we look at number 98, you'll notice pretty straightforward rhythms here, right? And we'll count them in just a second. But what makes this piece difficult is three things. The first thing is the dynamic, right? Piano. The second thing is the flams at the end, right? And remember, we've talked about flams before, that we hold one note, we hold one stick low to the surface, the other stick at our normal height, right? But when we play flams at a piano volume, it gets a little bit tricky to control, right? We'll talk about that in a second. The other thing that makes this piece a little bit tricky is the form, right? The form of the piece, or the roadmap of the piece, okay? So let's talk about that first and take a glance at that whole idea, right? So you'll notice at the end of the first line, we have a double bar line like it's the end of the piece, right? But it's not the end of the piece. It does say fine, right? And that means it's the end, but it's not the end yet when we get there the first time, right? So we keep going onto the second line, even though it feels really strange to get to a double bar line and not stop like it's the end, right? So we keep going on to the second line, and then if you notice, once we get to the end of the second line, our instruction says DC al fine, right? DC means go back to the beginning, and then al fine tells us that we're going to stop when we see the word fine, okay? So what we're going to do then is track along at the beginning of the piece. We're going to play the first line, jump down to the second line, play the second line, immediately go back to the first line, right? And then we stop at the end of the first line, okay? So that da capo al fine tells us we're going to go from the beginning to the end and then play the first line again, right? Or play the first line, play the second line, play the first line, okay? So that's the form, and we'll get a chance to do that once we get the piece together, but I wanted to talk about that first since it's a little bit confusing. Okay, next let's talk about the dynamic, right? So this piano dynamic poses a little bit of a challenge, but the way that we want to work on that, or the way that we want to control that dynamic, is by keeping our sticks lower to the surface, right? The less space between our stick and the drum, the softer we're going to be able to play. All right. Now this just takes some practice. It kind of takes some time to get used to it. But as we, as we spend more and more time playing at that lower dynamic, it'll get more comfortable and easier to control. Right. So you just got to trust the process and give it some time to develop. One other thing that we're going to do when we play soft on snare drum is we're going to move our sticks towards the front edge of the drum, right? And that's just going to thin out the sound a little bit, make it a little bit easier to play quietly, right? And also kind of avoid some of the weird overtones we can get from the middle of the drum if we play soft in the center, okay? So we're thinking keep our sticks low and play towards the front edge of the drum. Not all the way to the edge, but a couple inches away from the edge, right? Right about here. Okay? A nice way to practice soft dynamics on your snare drum is to turn the snares off. I just find sometimes that helps me hear a little bit better what my sound is like, right? So I'm going to turn the snares off on my snare drum. And then just play a simple exercise, right? Any exercise that we've done on snare drum, whether it's 8 on a hand or any sort of variation like that, is helpful to play at a soft dynamic to get used to playing at that level, okay? So let's just take in our playing area a couple inches from the front edge of the drum with the snares off and our sticks nice and low. We're thinking, something like 3 inches off of the surface. Maybe a little less than that, maybe more like 2, something like that, right? And then we're just going to try to play 8 on the right, 8 on the left, and keep it really, really consistent. okay? And you can spend a lot of time warming up with that, right? And just getting used to moving just a little bit to get those notes, right? Now make sure you really listen to your sound, right? Tune in with your ears and make sure that every single note sounds the same. It's harder, it's more difficult to do than it looks, right? But then also, while you're doing that, make sure that your hands stay relaxed. Sometimes when we play soft, we feel like we have to squeeze onto the stick to really control it, right? But your hands need to be more relaxed when you play soft than they do when you play loud even, okay? And we do want to have our hands relaxed all the time while we're drumming, okay? So that's the dynamic thing, right? Once we get warmed up on playing some piano notes, then we can start working on these rhythms. But once we've warmed up on it, our hands will be more used to it, and our ears will be more used to listening to the sound and making sure that it stays consistent while we're playing soft. Okay, so the last challenge that we gotta look at here is the flams, the soft flams, right? So when we played regular flams, we had one note about here, one note about here, drop them at the same time, right? Now all we have to do with that is shrink it down, right? But we got to shrink down both hands, right? The little note and the big note have to get lower. Okay, and then let's see if we can go a little bit lower. And a little bit lower. And as I'm going lower, I'm moving closer to the front edge of the drum, right? Back to where we were just practicing that exercise a second ago, right? So here's a little bit lower than that. Okay, and then here's all the way down to my piano height and on my piano location on the drum. Okay, and you can spend a good amount of time just practicing consecutive flams like that, and just listening to your sound and making sure that all your flams sound exactly the same. Okay. You can do the same thing with the other hand too, right? You can play the grace note with your right hand and the primary note with your left hand. Sometimes that tends to be more difficult. Okay, and then a really good exercise is to go back and forth. Right hand flam, left hand flam. Right hand flam, left hand flam. Keeping it all at that piano volume and listening to see if your flams on as you switch hands have sounded the same or if they sound a little different, and then try to make them the same. Okay, so let's try that. Right first, and then left. Okay, now let's try that same thing with the snares on and see what, kind of get used to what that sounds like, and then we'll take a look at the piece. Okay, so right hand flam, left hand flam. Okay, now when we get to the end of the piece here and we have those 4 flams in a row, I'm going to play them all with my right hand. Some people like to alternate them. I find at a piano volume I can be much more consistent if I play all those flams with the same hand. Okay, so now let's go ahead and count through the rhythm of this piece, and we'll take the repeats and everything so we get used to doing that, right? And let's count through the whole piece, and then we'll kind of bring this all together and play it as it's written. Okay, so counting from the beginning, here we go. And ready, go. 1, 2, and 3, E and a 1 and 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3, E and a 1, rest, rest. 1, 2, and 3, E and a 1 and 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3, E and a 1, 2, and 3, and 1. 2 and 3 E and a 1 and 2, 3, 1, 2 and 3 E and a 1, and that's the end. Okay, all right, now let's try bringing all this together, right? Keeping in mind that we're doing a lot of things all at once here, right? We're doing soft dynamics, we're doing flams, and we're also having to count rhythms and take repeats. So there's a lot to think about all at the same time, right? So be patient. It'll come with experience. But remember, you can always break back down those components, right? If you have trouble catching the repeat, just try counting it again and go through the repeats, right? If you have trouble with the flams, try working on the flams just by themselves. If you have trouble keeping your dynamics soft or keeping your hands consistent at that soft dynamic, play some more exercises at a piano level, maybe with the snares off, right? And spend more time doing that before you try to put it all back together again, okay? All right, let's give this a shot. And ready, go. All right, so that's number 98 on snare drum. Soft dynamics, flams, DC, Alfine, right? A lot of components there, right? Remember, just keep breaking it down, keep working on each thing individually, and slowly bring it all together, okay? All right, have fun with that, and I'll see you next time.